but I have quite a clear memory of trying that for the first time and thinking, wow, this is an amazing wine.
I'm really excited to dive deep into that.
I mean, the key to passing the Master of Wine is to actually...
What would be the wine that you would drink if you could drink only one wine for the rest of your life?
I actually discovered during the process that I'm dyslexic. The chances of it happening are so slim. But of the four first white wines that we tasted, I'd been to two of the properties. That was a very frustrating period, to be honest.
How many years did it take for you?
17 in all. Yeah, quite a number of my friends were masters of wine for several years before I passed. I think I'm right in saying that we have somewhere in the region of about 15 to 17 million matches.
I think that as a business strategy, this is a very smart move.
I think the more expensive a wine is, the harder it is to truly justify incredibly high prices. I mean, my experience is you have to be very careful with AI, because there's no point in going out the night before and thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, what are the great varieties?
Why are the prices so unpredictable? How do the import taxes, the branding and the hype inflate the prices? Hello everyone, this is the Czapp Árpád podcast. Today my guest is David Allen. He's a Master of Wine industry veteran and the wine director at Wine Searcher, the world's leading most powerful wine database. With access to real-time global wine pricing data, he understands trends before they even happen. Welcome, David. It's really nice to meet you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm not sure I understand the trends, but certainly we have a setup here designed to do that.
Of course, I'm sure that you have more of an insight than most of us with all the data available.
We see a certain amount going on, but I mean, literally, there's so much data; it's almost impossible to follow. You see various blips going on and that sort of thing, but sometimes it's good to stand back and look and see what the trends are.
I can imagine, and I'm really excited to dive deep into that. But before that, I think it would be nice to start with your own journey. How did you end up in the wine industry?
How did I end up in the wine industry? I was looking for a job between school and university. There was I would describe it actually as an off license across the road from my house. I ended up working there. I went away to university, came back, and it had been transformed into an Oddbins wine shop. And I ended up working there. And I worked for a manager who had a real love and managed to convey a love of wine. I caught that bug. So I worked there for most of my university holidays, and that was what I ended up doing when I finished university. So that's
interesting, and a very common story. I always hear this from wine people, that their journey into the wine industry was not really like a planned idea, but there is always a person that was so inspiring and so engaged about wine that they caught this passion.
A person, and I suppose the wines they showed you as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I find myself thinking, I was at a conference week before last, the Pinot Noir conference in Christchurch, and somebody mentioned one of the sort of great early Pinot Noirs from Martinborough, which was Martinborough Vineyards 1985 Pinot Noir. And I hope I'm not imagining it, but I have quite a clear memory of trying that for the first time and thinking, wow, this is an amazing wine.
Wow.
All these years on to be reminded of that was great. But it's a wine I still have a clear taste memory for.
Yeah, those memories can really grab onto us and lead the way into the wine industry. And when did you decide, and what drew you to the Master of Wine qualification?
I think I was in a situation where I'd finished school, I'd gone to university, I was used to studying, working for Oddbins. We were encouraged to do the WSET exams, so I worked through and I did my diploma. And when you graduate, or certainly at that stage, when I graduated from the passing the WSET diploma, I was sent a letter inviting me to go along and see if I wanted to study for the MW. So I went along, did the day and the tests that they put you through and that sort of thing, and really quite enjoyed it. and to my enormous surprise, was accepted onto the course. At that stage, you probably have you think you know a bit about wine, but you have quite a clear idea that you don't know that much. And as the course goes on, you learn more and more how little you know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that this is a common thing that they invite WSET graduates, or was it like this just
early 1990s? I don't know whether that's still the case, but
okay, I see. Yeah, probably at that point the WSET wasn't this widespread. Today it's quite popular. So
certainly not. I don't think it has the international reach that it does these days. But
yeah. And how was the Master of Wine process when you got accepted?
Well, it was a long and frequently frustrating process, to be honest. I mean, the key to passing the Master of Wine is to actually get your head around what they're looking for. I think some people imagine that you're going to suddenly become some sort of wine Jedi, and you're going to be able to just sort of taste a wine and know immediately what it is. It's not that glamorous, unfortunately. It is a question of being systematic about your tasting and having the knowledge behind it. And I mean, the process is fantastic. I mean, there is the ability to, I think being a Master of Wine student is fantastic. There's the ability to go to wineries all around the world, introduce yourself, and people are happy to talk to you. Some fantastic people. I mean, I've spent days with people like Paul Draper at Ridge, for instance. An amazing day there tasting Zinfandels and Cabernets. I spent a day with Tony Jordan, who was the man who set up Green Point for Moet and was running Cloudy Bay and that sort of thing. So really meeting some fantastic. I don't have much in the way of language skills, so mostly English-speaking winemakers initially. But just traveling around and being treated so hospitably by this wonderful industry we work in, and learning so much. People eager to tell you what they're doing and how they've achieved that, and to talk about their regions and the great varieties they're growing, etc.
Of course,
that's fantastic. And the exam process is then much more difficult, of course. But then that involved travel as well, and I mean that took me on various trips to places I wouldn't have gone to on my own. So Germany to Bordeaux, trips like that. Trips to Hungary, Chile, South Africa. I've been very fortunate in terms of travel, and I think certainly that's the way I learn. So that was very important for me. But then I frustratingly, it took me such a long time. I mean, I actually discovered during the process that I'm dyslexic, for instance. So it was one of the frustrating things was I passed the tasting fairly early on in the process, and then it was the written exams that I had difficulty with. So the fun bit was out of the way fairly early.
As usually I hear the opposite story. Most people say that the tasting exam is the hardest, but it's interesting that it was the other way around for you.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing, and actually, somebody once said to me, and I thought it was quite an insightful thing. I mean, one of the issues with dyslexia is the fact that it takes you longer to process your thinking and that sort of thing. So actually, the time pressure is probably greatest in the tasting papers, but I think I'd just become so systematic in the way that I was doing it that actually it became second nature.
That's interesting. What do you think? What is the reason for you being so easy for you, the tasting exam? Your system, or do you feel like you have a special talent in differentiating any aromas?
I don't think I necessarily have a particular tasting talent. I'm not a big believer that there are incredibly gifted tasters. I think there are people who work very hard at how they do their tasting. You know, and how much tasting have you done? How widely have you travelled? I mean, I think to study for the WSET, to study for the MW, it's a huge advantage to live in London, as I did at the time, because the entire world's wine trade is there to taste. It's a hugely privileged position to be in. I mean, now that I live in New Zealand, quite often if I'm setting up a tasting, I'll think, yes, I want to try that. That's a classic example of that from this country, and it's not available in the market. You know, you have to compromise. You have to find another wine that does the same sort of thing. So, yes, I mean, I've been fortunate to travel, but then I was also fortunate in where I was based in terms of that study. And the other thing about London is there's a wonderful availability of tastings to go to. The trade is very well provided with opportunities to be shown wines by importers and distributors there.
Yeah, that definitely is very helpful to have this environment that provides for learning. Do you have like a special strategy or way of tasting, like steps to try to identify the wine?
So, I mean, like I say, I think it's a question of being systematic, and if you're doing that, you're consistently looking at alcohol, acidity, fruit profile, winemaking steps, that sort of thing. And as you do that, you have to be very disciplined with your timing as well. I mean, you know, they now allow 2 hours, 15 minutes to taste 12 wines in the exam. So that's a very tight amount of time. We used to have to do it in 2 hours. And I mean, it still amazes me that I did it once, but just from the point of view of my exam technique, I had a wine that I was tasting, I was nosing it, and I couldn't work out what the heck it was. It was a full-bodied white wine, and I just thought, I don't have time to sit here and work out what this is. If I do that, I won't finish the paper. And so I thought, well, what could it be? Okay, let's say it's a Semillon. So I wrote up a note for a Semillon. Because I got my timing right, I had 5 minutes at the end to go back and nose all the wines. Suddenly this wine had opened up and it was giving off aromas of apricots. And you think, you know, this is quite clearly Viognier. How could I have missed that? How could I possibly have missed that? And I wouldn't have had time to have written a note for Viognier at that stage. But I did have time to go through and cross out Semillon and write Viognier. And so that's not necessarily a tasting skill. That was exam skill, I think. And being quite cool in the situation and assessing that. So it's always good to sort of stand back and be measured in the way that you look at these things. Okay,
that's interesting. So you would say that mostly the thinking should be excluding things. What can it not be, and maybe narrowing it down to, because obviously some wine styles can be similar, the descriptors can be similar.
I mean, very, very, very often the questions are designed to help you do that narrowing down. Obviously, there's a degree of that. And yes, what are you seeing there? When I was talking about being systematic, I mean, for instance, if you're talking about a wine, the climate for a wine, are you talking about its acidity, its ripeness, the flavor development, those things that will mark it out? And often, if you're writing a paper like that and you're under a lot of time pressure, you end up wanting to write more. Whereas actually what you need to concentrate on are the basics, that structure, the acidity, the alcohol, the acid, and the fruit, and how they combine to put together the wine. So, you know, being systematic like that and ensuring that you've picked off all the things that you feel it's necessary to talk about, to write about climate, for instance, stops you from writing those extra 2 lines that wouldn't have gained you anything, because you're looking at the salient facts, the most important things there. So it's picking out the most important facts. And once you've got that, yes, you can exclude an awful lot.
Of course. Well, that makes sense. And for the preparation for the tasting exam, what was your strategy? Was it more blind tasting and trying to exercise these descriptions, or mostly tasting wines that you knew what they are and trying to understand and memorize their style?
I think it's more the first. But
Okay.
I think as much as anything, it's a question of doing that practice to time and getting your answers down so that you're writing your answers quite automatically. And yes, it's as important to be going over those wines you think you know as it is to be going over the wines. There's no point in going out the night before and thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, what are the grape varieties in Sardinia? What if they come up? You're much better off to be sure that you know what Grenache, Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, Carignan, but mainline grape varieties taste like. And you're probably not going to lose a lot of marks for not identifying Mencia, for instance.
Okay.
But if you're tasting 4 Spanish wines, and one of them's clearly a Rioja and the other one might be a Ribera del Duero, well, then the Mencia is probably something you should think about for one of the others.
Okay.
And and if you describe it as Mencia, you should be able to say what you think about the sort of the structure of the tannins and the acidity and things like that.
Yeah.
So that even if you're wrong, what you're saying is consistent with the grape variety and what you're tasting in the glass.
Okay, so you also get points for even if the exact name is not right. I see. The wines, I would imagine most of the wines are really representative of their region. Are there any tricky or hard parts where you thought that this was maybe a bit too much, or they are mostly the things that you should really know?
I think actually setting a wine exam like that is a real art, because doing it for some of my mentees on occasions, you can have wines that you think are straight down the line and they really don't see that at all. Sometimes that's them missing it, but others it's you not quite seeing the whole picture. In terms of trickiness, there was one year when I sat, and I always say to my students, if I'm mentoring people, always number your glasses in the exam, because there was another taster sitting in front of me who said they'd actually put a faulty wine into the exam. And the person sitting in front of me said, "Oh, wine 9 was corked." Afterwards, and I said, "No, it was number 8."
Wow.
And there can be degrees of chance as well. I mean, I had one year where the second year I sat the exam where I'd got back from Australia the week before, and I'd done some fantastic visits, and the chances of it happening are so slim. But of the 4 first white wines that we tasted, I'd been to 2 of the properties in the previous 2 weeks. And there was one of them, it was a Hunter Valley Semillon, and I absolutely knew that it was Rosemount. Sorry, I beg their pardon. Okay. But I knew the style, it was Rosemount. It wasn't the Elizabeth Semillon. It wasn't developed enough for that. It wasn't, there were some of the other Semillons that would have been crisper, and it was clearly Rosemount. And then there was another wine, was the Cape Montel Sauvignon Semillon, and I wrote that up as a Sancerre. So, some you win, some you don't.
Yeah, what a lucky coincidence. So you're also mentoring students right now for Master of Wine.
To be honest, I haven't really done a lot of mentoring since I've been in New Zealand. It was much easier to do.
I see.
For groups I have had mentees, but it's much more reliant on the mentee contacting you. Whereas in London, we could meet as a group, and that was more effective. I did have a stage where I was, a few years ago, I was quite regularly going along to the education seminars in Australia, but I've not been to one of those for a couple of years, which is a shame, because it's a great opportunity to meet so many sort of eager young students and your fellow Masters of Wine, obviously. But No, I've not had the opportunity to in the last couple of years.
I see. And when you got the qualification, the Master of Fine, how did your career change, or were there any new opportunities, or what was that time?
On the day that I passed, I think my boss at the time was also a Master of Wine, Junior Viana, called me into his office, and at that stage, I got a pay rise, which was very welcome. And then a couple of days later, he called me into the office again, and I thought, I can't have done anything wrong in that period. And he said, no, well, actually, Martin, who the person I was reporting to, had just resigned, and would I like his job as the fine wine manager? So quite a lot changed in a very short space of time. How did it change, though? I'd been in a situation where, because it had taken me so long to pass, I'd actually been in the rather odd situation where I'd actually passed every part of the Master of Wine exam, but because I hadn't passed them in close enough in terms of years, some of them had lapsed, and I had to, for instance, I passed the dissertation the first year I sat, but by the time I'd passed the written exam, I had to redo a dissertation. So that was a very frustrating period, to be honest, because quite a number of my friends were Masters of Wine for several years before I passed. But
wow, I can imagine that was a huge work. So how many years did it take for you?
17 in all.
Wow.
I like to think it's a victory of persistence over ignorance.
Of course. Well, that is a great work and investment, and all the hard work paid off. I think this can be a great inspiration for all kinds of students, that if you have to push through, and lots of people get discouraged from so little.
Yes, it's a great shame to see a number of people who, I was very fortunate. I was single for most of that time, so I wasn't having to bring up a family. I had time to study, that sort of thing. So I had the luxury to be able to do that. And as I say, in its way, it's fantastic actually being an MW student. You have lots of ability to meet wine producers and learn without necessarily the expectation of enormous knowledge or that sort of thing. However, it is fantastic to have the recognition that you have an ability and an understanding at a high level of these things. And being in a situation where I had actually passed all of them, it was only when I actually got the qualification in the end that a lot of that was recognized by some of my peers.
Of course. Well, that must have been a very interesting, very frustrating period when you know that you passed all the exams, but still, because of the time range, you have to do it again.
I don't really, I can't honestly judge whether it's true or not, but when you pass, there's a fantastic evening in November at the Vintners Hall, which is a wonderful hall with its origins in medieval times, right in the heart of the city of London, and beautiful sort of painted ceiling and panel, and they have the silver out behind it, and you all go up individually and collect your certificate. And my sister told me that because the family come along as well, and she said there was a particularly loud cheer when I got mine, which was much appreciated from my fellow MWs. But that could just be my sister's bias in that situation. But
I can imagine that it could be. It must be true. So how did the Wine Searcher story start for you? When did you get this opportunity, and how was the move to New Zealand? Because you being in England, New Zealand is quite a world away. So I never been into New Zealand. It's a fascinating world for me. So I would love to hear from this part of the personal experience as well.
My journey in the wine trade sort of started with a period, including the time that I was working during my college holidays, of 17 years working for a company called Oddbins. And there was a stage in, I think it was 2000, when I moved from working as a retail wine store manager to our head office there. I met Vicky, my wife, working there. I hadn't really used computers very much prior to that, and she was one of our computer support team, and so it became a match made in heaven. Now Vicky's from New Zealand, so
okay.
We have 3 children, and we'd long been thinking that we would probably move with the children out here, because if you think about it, New Zealand and the UK are about the same size. I mean, I think New Zealand's a slightly larger landmass, but I think there are 65 million people living in the UK, and there are 5 million living in New Zealand. So there's an equation regarding space there, I think.
Yeah, less crowded for sure.
But the move that actually what prompted us to make the move eventually was, unfortunately, Vicky's father died. So we came back to come to the funeral, and it was just, well, we're here. Why should we go back? So we had a rather rundown house that needed completing. So I came back to the UK and worked on that for a couple of months and got it sold, and then came back out to New Zealand, where pretty much my job searching led me to Wine Searcher quite quickly. It just happens that it's relatively convenient, about a 45-minute drive from the town where we're living, which is where Vicky grew up. And it's absolutely suited me. I've come here and I've worked with a fantastic crew, a really, really experienced, knowledgeable, hardworking team we have here. Really committed, dedicated, really, really good crew.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I for some reason, when I was researching your story, I thought that the move to New Zealand was prompted by the Wine Searcher, but now I understand that it was...
It was quite the other way, actually, because as I say, I had to go back to the UK to fix up our house and get that sold. And I phoned Penny, who was the chief executive at the time of the Institute of Masters of Wine, and I said, well, I'm going to be looking for a job in New Zealand in the new year. And she said, oh, we don't really hear about stuff like that at all. And about a week later, she phoned me and said, oh, Wine Searcher have just been in touch. They're looking for somebody. You should contact them. So I got in touch and did an interview over the internet with Martin and got the job.
I see. Well, Wine Searcher is such an amazing tool. I use it a lot. And this whole encyclopedia part of it and price comparisons is really useful working in the wine industry. But for the viewers who might not use it so often, can you explain what is Wine Searcher and what it does?
What is Wine Searcher? Well, Wine Searcher was started back in 1999 by somebody called Martin Brown. He was the IT manager for Berry Brothers and Rudd, the Queen's wine merchants in London, and he saw the brokers there faxing one another lists of wines that they wanted to sell, and just realized that could be done so much better on a database, and thus the idea of Wine Searcher was born. So what we do at Wine Searcher is that we have a team that go out and collect wine lists from what we refer to as merchants. So they could be shops, they could be online wine merchants, they could be auction houses, they could be brokers. So we collect all those, and then we have a database onto which each of those individual offers is matched. I think I'm right in saying that we have somewhere in the region of about 15 to 17 million matches.
Wow.
I mean, the numbers are just phenomenal. As part of my job at one stage in working for Oddbins, I was running the bonded warehouse there, doing the duty side of it anyway. And, we thought we had quite a big database there for a warehouse, and the size of the database here is phenomenal. And it's a question of continually maintaining that, because you're not just looking at bottle sizes, you're trying to make sure that any anomalies that are creeping in terms of the matching are concerned. And, there are so many things that can come along to trip you up. I mean, one of the classics is, for instance, Chateau Latour. So Chateau Latour is a Pauillac. So that's the description, Chateau Latour Pauillac. But they also make a third wine, which is called Pauillac de Latour. So the computer has a hell of a difference working those two out as to where, and yet to the consumer, it's really obvious. How can you possibly not understand the difference there? And there's a massive price difference, and
of course.
So we have a team of people who are constantly creating, updating, maintaining those matches, making sure not just that the correct descriptions are put together, but also that pricing, sizing, because bottle size obviously is important, their vintages, all those are maintained and searchable. So that really is an ongoing business there. I think we've got 12 people doing that at the moment. So
wow.
I think a lot of people think that Wine Search is an algorithm. Well, actually, yes, there are plenty of algorithms involved, but until we've got 6 or 7 offers attached to a match, there's not enough information there for the machines to go off and find other similar matches. So, that's a technology that's continually developing.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. And talking about these anomalies, obviously, what about those segments that are so narrow, so little, maybe wine regions or wine producers that are regarding their quality or significance, they are significant, but they have so little data. How does Wine Searcher regard these situations when you don't really have enough data?
I mean, it's a process thing. I mean, because what we do is we collect data from the merchants, we're reflecting what's in the market. So, I mean, if there are only 1 or 2 offers for a particular wine in a particular vintage or size, we will post those. They may not necessarily get matched, but that information will still go to the database. And so you'll still be able to search under that name and possibly find it. It just won't be quite as clean a process as that. I mean, I guess it's a question that we are continually increasing the number of merchants that we're collecting from. So we have we've found various means of finding people's lists and uploading those.
Interesting. And how about the encyclopedia part? How does that develop? Because I think that is a really useful tool to find out, maybe even for students to learn about wine regions, grape varieties. How does that work and develop?
We have this idea that actually we're trying to support the whole wine buying process. So I mean, obviously, price comparison is a start point. So we want people to find the best price, but also we collect, for instance, critic scores, and we publish an aggregated critic score for all the wines we can. With the idea so that you can rate the quality. We'll also rate value for money, for instance, so price compared to quality there, obviously. So how does the encyclopedia, so we're talking about, if you want to come to a particular wine, if we've got that information, we will have the pricing, we may have a video on it, we may have some information as to how the wine was made, which we'll collect from producers' websites, information about the region, information about the producer. Did I say grape variety or did I say region twice? I've got slightly lost me. And these are all on tabs on that same find page. So you can see what the critics are saying. You can see what other users are saying. You can see any awards that a wine's won. Other information that's there. There's a whole page of price comparisons between the vintages or price trends. And how much the wines are being looked for. So that's available there. And a lot of this information is available for free. But then we also will sell a pro membership, which will give you greater insight. And predominantly that's giving more prices there. I mean, obviously, we have to support this whole enterprise. I mean, there's over 60 people working in this office, and then we have an office in London as well. But so if you are using the site for free, we will show you the results of those merchants who sponsor us. So those people who pay to have traffic sent to them, and it's a sort of 65 cents a click or something like that. So it's not a huge amount, but that's not necessarily related to the transaction. It's simply if we send traffic online to them.
Okay.
Now we're very much changing the model at the moment, to try and develop into a marketplace as well, so that we're actually, instead of just sending traffic to a merchant and they can do what they like with it, actually sending a sale to a merchant. So that's quite a big change in the way we're working, and currently we're doing that in the US and in the UK.
That is truly a great change, and I think that as a business strategy, this is a very smart move.
I think it's quite an important move, to be honest. I think people were finding the referrals method sort of, they weren't really sure whether they were getting value for money or not, and you get competition from Google themselves.
Of course,
selling Google ads. So yes, I think we needed to change. We might ideally have changed that model earlier. But yes, it brings a lot more. It brings a lot more work in terms of involvement in the transaction. So we'll see how that develops. But I think we still need to try and do everything we can to support the customer. I think there are lots of people who go out there saying, "Oh, you should buy this wine," and actually, what people want is support to go out there and decide which wine they want to buy themselves. And so, this kind of information, I think, is hugely valuable.
Of course. So this means that they would be able to find the wine on Wine Searcher and even go to the checkout to purchase it, and then you send the order to the producer. I see.
Yeah. So it's almost like a sort of Amazon model.
That's interesting. What is your role as a wine director? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
My role, I'm afraid I'm mostly try and look after the people who are doing all the work. I mean, I like to oversee the encyclopedia. I think it's important to make sure that we have high quality standards there, that the information we're putting out is. But I've got a team there that I have a lot of trust in, and I think the best thing I can do is support them. I mean, I've increasingly spent a lot of my time making YouTube videos. Again, to try and give an extra aspect to to the way we're sort of helping to support people through the wine buying process. I've done quite a bit more sort of travel, I get to speak at various conferences. I got to deliver some of our data on Pinot Noir to a conference in Christchurch in New Zealand a couple of weeks back. I should be speaking at a conference in Spain the end of March. And the other thing I do is stuff like, for instance, we'll report on the En Primeur campaign in Bordeaux this year. Again, we've been doing that quite regularly, sort of trying to be early with the notes and to try and get as much information as possible. So I'll go and I'll taste the wines and I'll make notes. And then one of my colleagues, Julia, works incredibly hard, and we have a team who'll process it. We collect all the information. So hopefully, by the time the campaign is actually in full swing, we should be able to tell you what the grape varieties in a wine are, the basics, and what the alcohol levels, and that sort of detailed product information to help inform around the transaction.
Well, that sounds fun. So you are really in the trenches collecting. Yeah, that's amazing. I think I have another business idea for Wine Searcher. I think you should sell the whole encyclopedia part as a book, because I think at the moment it's so extensive and it's so professional. As I've said, I'm using it quite a lot.
But actually, one of its virtues perhaps is that it isn't a book. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't know how many copies of the World Atlas of Wine I have, because it's updated every sort of 10 years or so. And
Yeah.
It's a huge advantage being online in that we can, part of our process
Always
is to keep all
updated.
this information up to date. So I'm not claiming we're always totally up to date, but it's a much easier thing to do than in a print.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I want to learn more about the whole behind the scenes of the wine industry and the price changes and the data that you have access to. How do you see the pricing evolution of the wine market right now? How do you see why are the prices so unpredictable? How do the import taxes, the branding, and the hype inflate the prices?
Well, that's a huge question. Look, without enormous research prior to having that, it's difficult to give clear answers. I think what can we see is we can look, for instance, the data I was giving at the Pinot Noir conference, we can look at producers or regions or countries, and we can sort of see how they fit into things. I mean, for instance, with Pinot Noir, it's very obvious that at the real top level of pricing, it's markets in China and Hong Kong that are driving pricing at the moment, and that is, at the moment, Burgundy dominates that sort of over $500 a bottle price bracket. I mean, we all wish we could drink those kinds of wines, but and actually, what I was saying to New Zealand's Pinot Noir producers was that they don't have any wines that fit in that at all, and yet you've got some fantastic wines. I mean, earlier I mentioned remembering very vividly Martin Bravignard's Pinot Noir, but I mean, wines like Felton Road and things like that, absolutely stunning wines. Atarangi is another one, absolutely delicious, and yet they don't come into those top flight prices. And at the same conference, there was Feng-Yi Walker, a Chinese master of wine, was actually saying, well, really, these wines are too cheap for this market because there are people looking for the prestige of these expensive wines, and they don't fit into that. And yet, I think they certainly deliver on quality and deliciousness. So, I mean, those are the kinds of insights that we can give. We can look at one of the things we were doing. We were looking at the situation in terms of the number of searches that we get from particular markets, and from that you can see what proportion of searches in that market are for a particular variety, and then you can look at what the listings from merchants are in that same market, and you can contrast whether the listing percentages are in line with the demand. So what we were seeing was that actually for most markets, listings for Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand are increasing, whereas actually it's demand for Pinot Noir from New Zealand that's increasing. So there seems to be an imbalance there that I think deserves a lot more consideration. So looking as to what markets you can be in, looking as to whether your pricing's correct, all these things are things that we do sell data to the trade that we can help with. I mean, for instance, if you're a producer in Bordeaux, I mean, yes, a lot of them very carefully control which negociant they sell to because they know which negociants have strength in which areas. But really, you have no control over where your wine's going to go once you've sold it to a negociant. So those kinds of insights can be useful to people. I mean, it might even be a producer. Somebody was talking to me the other day about they use Wine Searcher to see those markets where there are large format bottles, and if they feel that more need to be introduced into those markets, they'll do that.
Wow, that's interesting. Can you tell us some details that you answered to this producer? I'm curious about that.
No, I mean he was doing that just using the app normally. So he was completely in control of that. I didn't even do any work for that one. But there are so many different uses for these things, I think. One of the most bizarre bits of data I've ever come across was as part of my job, I oversee our content creation. So I report on the number of people watching, number of people using our news reports, number of users reading that. And we used to see very regularly spikes in readership of a particular article about a New Zealand wine producer, Kim Crawford. And we'd written this article a while back, and we couldn't work out why we were suddenly getting these large jumps in readership. And I actually managed to tie it back to when the particular company, Kim Crawford, were advertising their Sauvignon Blanc in the United States. So when there were bursts of advertising, we'd get bursts of people reading this story. And I suddenly realized that the reason they were doing this was that it was the article that on Google at that stage came up first. If you typed into a Google search, is Kim Crawford a man or a woman? Because Kim's very definitely a man, but I think in America, the name is often a woman's name. So, and it was quite bizarre actually that we managed to get to that stage of realizing it. But and to see that, just to see that from that, the effectiveness of their advertising was fascinating as well.
It's so interesting.
Spikes in interest. I wrote a story a couple of years ago, and I couldn't honestly remember who they are, but there was a K-pop band that had decided that they were seen drinking Chateau Margaux, and suddenly we'd seen it.
I think I read this article. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the insights you get there. You can have a golfer has decided to drink Aubryon, and suddenly it goes bananas in terms of people searching for it. Well, it's not necessarily people buying it, of course. I mean, that they just want to know, what is this Aubryon thing? How expensive is it? And well, I'm sure some of them drink it, but probably not that many.
Of course, it's so interesting that Wine Searcher became this platform that follows all the waves of the wine industry, and you can see all these things and maybe anomalies.
Oh yeah, and we have a screen in the middle of the office where you can sort of see what the trends are, and
in real time.
I'd have to check with one of our tech guys to be sure as to how what sort of delay or that sort of thing is. But I mean, to be honest, there is just so much data. We probably don't see most of the trends that go on.
Of course. I think, how do you see the involvement of AI in this thing? Because as you said, the data is so much for a human, it's quite hard to grasp. But I would imagine that nowadays it would be possible to design some artificial intelligence algorithms to find out some of the things that maybe it's hard to see for the human eye.
My experience is you have to be very careful with AI, because wine is a very particular and very specific subject. I mean, when I was presenting the information from the Pinot Noir conference, sometimes you love it if one of the diagrams has a real anomaly on it. And I looked, and in the sub $4 bracket, suddenly we were looking at the change in distribution between countries over the 8 years since we last had a Pinot Noir conference. And this seemed to show that there was a massive leap up in terms of the sector that the US controlled of sub $4 US Pinot Noir, which isn't really necessarily a category that most people should be looking at, I think. And when I looked into it, there were two products concerned, and I think one of them was labelled Almaden Mountain Burgundy, and it came in a 5-litre cask, hence the really low 70 centilitres. And somebody, when they put the match together here, had seen the word Burgundy and decided that was a Pinot Noir. And you do a quick search in Google, and you see that I can't remember whether it was that one or the other one, had included in the blend were Merlot and Zinfandel. And you think, well, okay, so that's actually the information's wrong. We'll correct that. And you frequently get issues like that we have to correct. But I was intrigued. Google's AI assistant at the time came up with an idea, and I was searching for the blend for these wines, and it told me that because they were Burgundy, the blend would be Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So even if it was Burgundy, the blend wouldn't be Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But I think for information like that, you have to treat AI very carefully, because if you're not specialist enough, you might think it's completely correct, and that then modifies the amount of rubbish on the internet, and that therefore increasingly becomes a modifier. So we do need to be cautious. I think you need to treat AI very much like the sort of the office temp you take on sort of straight out of university, that they can be very eager, they can get through a lot of stuff, but you have to be very careful with what they produce. Now, how quickly that will change, I really don't know. And I'm sure there are plenty of areas in terms of, say, analytics, writing, programming is what I understand is very handy to get it to do. I don't work in that part of the business, so I can't really comment beyond the fact that I've heard that remark. But I've had a number of instances. One of our guys got AI to write an article about sweet wine at one stage. And yes, it had a lot of the right information in it, but it wasn't an article that was structured in a way that it sort of said, oh, well, there are these wines and they're botrytis wines, and this is because the grapes concentrate, etc. And then these ones are where the fermentation's been stopped, and these are where the wine's been fortified. It didn't make distinctions like that. And the other thing was, they will pick up on information. I mean, for instance, it told us that Sauterne could be red. Well, we know that red wines are made in Sauterne, but no. So it's got the wrong end of the stick there.
Exactly.
And yes, there is this idea that AI will improve, etc. But AI will only improve if the information it's using is correct. And so if there's more AI-generated misinformation like that out there, it's going to have to be much more discerning than it is now to get past that.
Well, I think the potential in this is more on the side of like internal AI systems, so not the general ones that everybody can use, but models that have been trained on internal data, and you can be, so for example, if Wine Searcher would build a model that is trained on your interior data, and maybe all these I'm sure that it can be programmed to not include the anomalies.
I suppose I'm talking about what I would refer to as generative AI, and I'm aware that I'm straying way off my specialist subject here, so your listeners are probably turning around and saying this is complete tosh. I mean, certainly we have people who have been working on wine matching engines for years now, taking models and matching what we've seen in one wine match to the rest of the database and helping us do that. But again, those have relied on us having a team of people continually maintaining those matches. So I think for accuracy's sake, and here at Wine Searcher, we've always prided ourselves very much on trying to be as accurate as possible, because otherwise the tool is useless if you can't rely on it. I think we're a long way off replacing people with AI on that in that area.
Yeah, I do agree. Another anomaly that I've noticed, and it's maybe an interesting part of all the ranking systems on the most expensive lists. Usually the top end can be a bit maybe confusing, because at those high levels, the highest prices, the sales are not as normal as for normal prices. And one example that I've noticed on the Bordeaux list, the most expensive list, as far as I remember, as I saw, the Liber Pater is not included on the most expensive list, I would guess, because it's a very particular, and maybe
and also because I think those lists are based on what is AC, and of course Liber Pater lives without outside the system on that. So yeah, no, we're not putting Loic Pasquet down. He's decided that that's where he wants to sit. So good on Loic as far as that's concerned. He's a good friend of Wine Searchers. Actually, we're very, very grateful to him for giving us quite a lot of information about his region and how he works. I think
most definitely. Have you ever tasted his wines?
I did the last couple of years. Yes, I during the Entrepreneur visits, I've been to see Loic, and I've tried a few vintages there. Last year we tried he has a new wine that he's making in Greece on the island of Naxos.
Oh, really?
White wine where he discovered a vineyard in the middle of a forest, and I believe he you'll probably tell me I've got some of this slightly wrong, but I think he cut the trees down to find that the vines were still there from a previous vineyard that had existed. So,
wow.
A very sort of typically artisanal sort of thing as far as Loic's concerned. You know, these sort of incredibly old vines on their original roots. And
wow, that sounds exciting. How do you see this, as you said, this is also a great example of having an amazing story behind the wine. And how do you see this perceived prestige and actual quality balance right now in the wine industry, and what are the trends? Because lots of people are getting frustrated about some of the prices and this perceived prestige. Lots of people are on the other side saying that those wines that fetch so high prices are actually that complex and that rare or valuable experiences. How do you see that?
I think the more expensive a wine is, the harder it is to truly justify incredibly high prices. I mean, you know, it's up to you. What are you prepared to spend for a wine? How captivated are you by it? I mean, I was once lucky enough to visit Domaine Romani Conti, and we tried.
Okay.
I believe it was the 2005s from barrel. So fabulous vintage, amazing wines, and just absolutely astounding. I mean. I don't think I can justify to myself buying those wines, but I can see that they had an incredible effect on me. That I can see that they deserve to be highly priced and highly prized.
I see. Well, I have never had the chance to taste Romani Conti, but disregarding the price, would you say that it was such like an experience that was above maybe other highly priced wine regions? Not saying that it's worth its price, but maybe is it worth having one of the highest price just by tasting it?
Yes. I could see that there was something exceptional about the wine, and I think for those top wines they have to have incredible quality, but they also have to have their own individuality and character. It's like, if you come back to a glass of that, could you recognize it again? And I think that there's quite a bit in that. I mean, that said, I think there's some fabulous wines that are still affordable. Anytime I go to tastings of wines from Portugal, for instance, I mean, fantastic. Some amazing wines from southern Spain. I'm actually quite jealous. There are a couple of fellow MWs, and I wouldn't claim to have any ability to make wine, but Norrell Robertson and Fernando Mora in Caliatuf. I hope I've said that correctly. Okay. People who've gone out and they've found these old vine vineyards, and they've nurtured them and made some fabulous wines from them.
You always have to be on the lookout, and to discover these hidden gems is always such a pleasure. Do you see any wine regions that you think that have a lot bigger potential than they have right now, than the market that they have right now?
I know there is actually quite a sort of a love of Greek wine now, but I still think a lot of Greek wines are still undervalued. I mean, a lot of the wines I love have really good acidity. So Assyrtiko from Santorini, for instance, I mean, what an amazing wine that can be. Xinomavro from Nausa. There's some incredible wines there. But then you can look around all over the place. I mean, every time I try wines from table wines from the Douro.
Okay.
I mean, again, you can get some lovely, precise acidity, but also such lovely richness there. Whenever I revisit Beaujolais, I find myself thinking, why do I not drink more of these? There can be some fabulous wines there.
Of course.
I'm a big lover of the wines of southern France, things like Minervois. And there's some really exciting people working there at the moment. I mean, people like Anne Grove, for instance. I mean, she's making some fabulous wines there.
I kind of agree with you on these predictions, and I also think that the wine industry is getting more and more diverse, and more interesting regions get more attention. Not too fast, but on the Greece side, I'm actually working on a piece right now about Greek wines. It's such an interesting, the whole story being one of the earliest adopters of the wine culture. And in the recent history, the Greek wines were kind of lost, and nobody really talked about them. And now they are picking up slowly traction, and it's so interesting. And so many grape varieties.
I mean, I didn't mention, for instance, Mostra Filero. I mean, lovely, easy drink there.
Yeah, they have hundreds of grape varieties. What do you think? Is it maybe a small disadvantage for a country to have so many indigenous special grape varieties in the global market, to find their niche and maybe get recognized? Is the attention too dispersed?
I think it enables them to focus on an individual thing, to be honest. I think maybe the large, well-recognized grape varieties work better for bigger brands, international distribution and the like. I think, for instance, within France, there is this sort of split between the big shippers of Bordeaux and Burgundy, and then the wine distribution in the south, for instance, it just seems to be much more related to the locale and the food, and that there's a much more holistic way of looking at the whole thing. One is a beverage, and the other is part of culture, and maybe it's that sort of longer history in those areas.
Yeah, and it's like a different business model. Even when these wineries are so integrated in the community, it's a bit more about tourism as well.
I suppose historically also, I mean, places like Burgundy traditionally would have traded with Paris, and then out through the Low Countries into Northern Europe, whereas Bordeaux would probably have traded with the UK and then Northern France and Belgium and Holland and that sort of thing. Whereas the south of France, their trade routes are less easy, to be honest, to those large centres. So yes, I mean, I think it's become it's remained much more as sort of part of the culture and part of the whole lifestyle.
Yeah. What would you say for the smaller wineries in these upcoming regions? What has more potential? Working on trying to introduce these new grape varieties and produce varietal wines, or maybe building their own styles of blends and building their own personal brand instead of trying to hatch onto a grape variety?
I think that's a very difficult one. I mean, I think you've got to go with what works for you. Do you have an individual terroir that picks your variety out. I mean, for instance, I spent a little bit of time at a producer called Marde du Margassac in southern France last year, and actually they've been slightly maligned for the fact that they grow Cabernet Sauvignon in a region that's Cabernet Sauvignon is not traditionally grown in, but it actually suits their terroir. They have a particular valley there that channels cold air, and so they have a cool terroir where this suits them. It wouldn't suit everybody.
Interesting.
And I think you have to do what you can. You have to do what you can do best, with your place, with your grape variety, with your, what foodstuffs work best. I mean, if you're in southern France, around Carcassonne, for instance, having a wine like a big Minervois La Lavinière that will go with a cassoulet, for instance, that's on a cold winter's evening, that's a match made in heaven. As long as you're not too worried about your cholesterol. But then the red wine should be helping you sort that out as well. So,
of course. What would be, as a closing question, what would be the wine that you would drink if you could drink only one wine for the rest of your life?
Ooh, only one. You said you'd watched some of my videos. You probably wouldn't be surprised to hear it was Riesling.
Yeah.
I think it would probably have to come from the Saar Valley, because they're the most precise and delicate, and almost certainly it would have to be made by Egon Muller. But unfortunately, that's probably never going to happen. But I have spent a couple of visits to the Schatzhofberg, and they've been fabulous visits. And I mean, actually, that is a producer whose wines command amazing prices that you think, actually, yes, they do have an X factor in the way the wines are made in terms of their balance and their precision, coming both from the site and from the producer, that is absolutely exceptional. And you can totally see why those wines are so ridiculously expensive, I suppose. Either that or wonderful Furmint from Islandzepsi and Mad.
Wow, that answer warms my heart. I'm not sure if you know, but I'm Hungarian, and I actually live quite close to Tokaj, like 2 hours away from Tokaj. So
I've been very fortunate to be able to visit and taste that there. And again, I think the wines I love often are well defined by having a good low pH, and obviously Furmint comes into that very spectacularly.
And actually, it is quite close to Riesling. They are even far siblings. So it's a similar style. How do you see the future of Tokaj? Actually, last week we just participated at the Furmint February Grand Tasting in Budapest. Tasted lots of amazing Furmint wines from all the sides of the spectrum, from some great sparkling wines all the way to Asu Essencias. What do you see? What is the potential in the Furmint and Tokaj wines, and what are the challenges? Because it's a huge question in Hungary right now, being focused on Asu wines and the sweet wines for so long, and the market is kind of struggling because it's such a small section of the market focusing on these sweet wines, and they are quite intensively focusing on the dry Furmints and even on sparklings. How do you see that development?
Really well made, cleanly made dry Furmint is amazing. I would add that a really good harsh Levalu can have some fabulous aromas as well. I love as a style, actually, the late harvest Tokajs. I think they bridge the gap very nicely. I think that is a good way of introducing people into the sweet wines of Tokaj. I think there's everything there to be able to define quality in these wines. You have these great growths that are already defined. Saint Tamash comes to mind. I'm sure I could name a few more. So there's a history that's defined these vineyards. There's a wonderful winemaking tradition that I think actually these days it's fair to say has been out into the world and has seen how, quality wines are made elsewhere. I mean, I think the quality of wine in Tokai, coming from Tokai these days, is certainly the ones I've tried has been incredibly high. I've been fortunate to do a bit of work with Zepsi, but producers like Dishnoko and Oremus, and certainly the wines we see are really, really high quality throughout. And it will always be it will always be a niche, because I think it requires the uniqueness of the Azu styles, or it requires the Azu styles to define its uniqueness. That's a style that you don't really find much beyond Tokai itself. I mean, even the sort of the Aussbrucks from Austria don't quite have the same sort of styling. But the extra facets that you get from the dry wines, I personally love. I mean, that's how commercial they are. I struggle to struggle to say without sort of reference back to the system, etc.
It's definitely exciting, and the developments are really curious to follow. The sparkling wines that are coming up are also quite amazing.
Not
and the aging potential. You didn't never tried
no.
sparkling formants? It's actually quite the trend is growing right now. It's not that common, I would say. I also do not have the statistics, but I have had the opportunity this next week to try some, and I think it has great potential. The acidity of formant and the complexity
it would make
with
sense.
some bottle fermentation. Traditional method sparklings were quite exciting. So I think that can also have the potential and the aging potential of the sweet wines. Actually, I think I just saw a few days ago one of your videos about 1993 Tokai Asu Essentia.
That was quite an interesting one, actually, because it was an old-fashioned example of an old-fashioned category. And in some ways almost a shame to sully the name Essentia with a wine like that. I mean, an interesting wine, but once you've tasted a proper Essentia, it's nothing quite matches up.
Of course. Well, that was also from a very special historic area, right? A few years after the end of the communist era, so the whole wine industry was recombobulating.
Oh, indeed, yeah.
Well, David, this was a really exciting conversation. Thank you for doing this. It was an honor.
Thank you. It's been very interesting to talk to you about.
Where can our followers find you?
Well, on YouTube, normally hanging out there doing wine tasting videos. So that's the Wine Searcher YouTube at the moment. But then those videos where we have them are also available on the Find page of the Wine Searcher website.
I would definitely recommend checking out David's videos. He has a huge library tasting some amazing wines, and I think it's a really helpful resource to check out when looking out for some amazing wines.
Incredibly kind of you to say.
Thank you, David, for doing this. It was a pleasure, and hope to continue this discussion in person one day. Let me know when you are coming to Hungary.
I will indeed. Thank you.